We stay in France for a hot-button issue here, the question of whether or not to put curfews in place for young people. Politicians and social commentators are going at each other over this question. Solange Mougin has more on what some towns have decided to do in the name of ensuring that teens and children are not out in the streets at night, and why the move is highly controversial.
It's a measure that's gaining traction. Nighttime curfews for minors as a means to allegedly curb youth violence. The first of this most recent spate of curfews began when Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin announced on a visit to the French territory of Guadeloupe that a Pointe-à-Pitre curfew for those under 18 would begin April 22nd. The measure, the government says, is an attempt to curb rising violence. For police officers, the week began with ID checks and phone calls home to parents.
Yes, hello, it's the police. Just to check, can you confirm your daughter's age and her date of birth?
In mainland France, the southeastern city of Béziers soon followed suit. On Tuesday, its far-right mayor, Robert Ménard, decreed a curfew for those under the age of 13, from 11 at night until 6 in the morning in 3 different areas, and this until September 30th. The decree also states that parents could be held penally responsible if their children break the rules. On Ménard's heels, the Conservative mayor of Nice, Christian Estrosi, said he too wants a curfew starting next month.
Today we have parents who have thrown in the towel. They aren't taking responsibility. Naturally, as we take this measure, we will also ensure that the parents are held accountable.
In the past, similar decrees have been met with judicial pushback and with protests, like the one against the Béziers mayor on Tuesday. Critics say that these measures do little to curb violence, which only a small fraction of stems from those under the age of 13.
And joining me on set is journalist Solange Mougin. Thank you so much for joining us, Solange. These youth curfews target minors, but their parents as well. To what extent are French children and teens creating violence and problems in public spaces? For somebody just discovering this theme, it seems quite extreme.
Well, the French Interior Ministry actually has figures on this. Earlier this year, they published a snapshot of sorts about delinquency and violence in France, and they found that those under the age of 13 are just 2% of violent acts towards others, and they're just 1% of highly violent crimes. Comparatively, 44% of thefts with violence, for example, they were committed by people between the ages of 18 and 29 years of age. So statistically speaking, it isn't the very young that are creating this increase of street violence in the places where it is occurring, which brings us to why then are these curfews being rolled out? And this is where there are societal and political elements at play. First, curfews and the use of them have long existed. They've been on the law books since the Algerian War. They were used, as we all remember, during COVID and more certainly in certain towns, and more recently in certain towns after the murder or death of Naël, the young man who was shot by police officers. So to a degree, they have become less shocking of sorts for certain mayors to roll out. But it is not a widespread group of mayors that are putting these decrees in place. It's often mayors that are on the far right. With the European elections coming up, some French people in Béziers, for example, they feel that there is political staturing going on, whereas others, they're actually quite pleased about the curfews.
I think the curfew is a good idea. We need to limit the number of teenagers in the street.
I think it's a measure that comes again as a punishment. Or instead of asking about the cause, why teens can be outside without anyone looking after them, youth that turn to violence to express their feelings of being rejected. Instead of that, we only talk about punishments and not solutions, or how to help them. It's like wielding a stick against them.
Now, these curfew decrees, they still need to hold up into the courts. In 2018 in France, its high court actually struck down the Béziers mayor's previous curfew because it found no clear and particular danger could be proven. Now, this is also why the age of 13 is the cutoff of most of these decrees, save for Guadeloupe, where the cutoff is 18 and where violence has been growing in France. 13 is legally l'âge de discernement, or the age of discernment, the age where a judge considers that a youth can fully differentiate between right and wrong. So putting the curfew for those under the age of 13 serves several purposes. It means that the decree could hold up better against legal pushbacks. It allows mayors, who are often far-right ones, but not always, to be able to say that they're taking security measures and protecting children, even if statistically the violence isn't often coming from them. And finally, it creates a media buzz just before these EU elections.
Let's talk about the psychological and societal aspect of these curfews. Does France have an unruly youth problem? And I must admit, this strikes me as being, we're talking about the far right, but there's also the issue of immigration, immigrant communities that are highly targeted as well by these kinds of curfews. I mean, let's not forget there is a racial aspect to this too very often.
There is, and that is why many of these decrees are coming from far right. Or it's critics say one of the reasons it's coming from really far right people is targeting. And critics say that is one of the sources. But when it comes to youth and how French youth are doing, well, many people in France have been asking this question after a number of highly mediatized fights and crimes involving children and teens. It also comes as France's education system is going through a crisis, with many teachers and parents as well complaining about shifts in authority, also not enough means to help unruly kids and to help kids in general. There are also concerns about spiking levels of depression among French youths and teens. A recent study showed that 1 in 5 has been depressed at some point. That's double the 2017 levels. Now, for this psychologist who spoke to French media, such curfews may actually not help them.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils vont faire?
What are they going to do? They're going to go outside and play cowboys and Indians. Very quickly, it's going to get everyone riled up. A sanction only has value if the teen understands the reason. If it falls on him suddenly and violently, then most of the time it will be a power struggle. Punishments should not be power struggles. They need to be understood, which takes time.
Ça veut dire qu'on prend du temps.
Needless to say, the question of curfews is a hot-button issue right now in France, as is how French kids are really, and teens are really doing, especially in today's age of screens and social media.
Thank you so much, Solange Mougin, with that insight on what is shaking French public opinion.